pleasant good evening to you in Radio Land, on the internet, and internet world at home and abroad. Thank you for choosing Q95. This is the Global View on Q. A very warm welcome, all of our Q family listeners at home and globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, 7th November, the 46th Tuesday of 2023, and it's just about 8:02 p.m. at Q95, the big station. We're live on Facebook and YouTube. Please follow us at Q95 FM Radio. The on-air phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Share the live and like our pages. Get the latest breaking news and reviews only on Q95, the big station. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, love, peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. So tonight, on the heels of our 45th year of self-rule, my distinguished guest, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, financial economist and UWP Team Dominica leader, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, and a little later on, we hope to be joined by Attorney Gabriel Christian. And I hope they will familiarize, especially our younger generations who know only this current DLP regime. So I hope we can familiarize them with previous eras of governance, from Edward Oliver Leblanc to Patrick Roland John to Oliver J. Seraphin to Dame Mary Jr. Charles, Edison Chenfield James, Rosie Douglas, Pierre Charles, and now Roosevelt Skerritt, so that our youth can learn about what these leaders and the people of Dominica accomplished then, compare and contrast these eras with our current situation, and answer this question: are we anywhere close to being independent after 45 years? Are we where we should be in terms of development? Are we better off now than we were 23 years ago when the DLP regime came to office? So we will certainly rediscover our history, our past leaders, who they were, what were their traits, their principles, their values that they possessed, what caused them to embrace politics, why did they get in there? What did they seek to do? How did they govern? Were they corrupt? What did they actually do and accomplish while in office? What real contributions did they make? What value did they add to our community, to our society, to our economy and our culture? We hope this conversation tonight will help our young people to determine what are the real possibilities and their potentials based on past performance of governments and private sector entrepreneurs, and help them to work towards becoming the best that they can be to advance themselves, each other, our community, and our society, as opposed to simply being made to believe that we must depend on a political party or a government to give us a fish instead of teaching us how to fish, and thereby make ourselves truly independent after 45 years of self-rule. I believe that most Dominicans would say we are now more dependent than we were during these past eras. So we will compare and contrast the situations during each of those political leaders' eras in terms of governance, of public service, of health services, sports, recreation, culture, entertainment, utilities, infrastructure, police services, as well as economic output in agriculture, manufacturing, production, productivity, processing, light industries, foreign earnings from exports, and from inflows from tourism and knowledge industries. Our young people need to know their real value, and we'll try to see how we can help them to determine that. We will compare and contrast development indicators like GDP, personal and household incomes, home ownerships, employment, poverty, crime, mendicancy, corruption, and other such parameters during these eras. We will also take a close look at the state of our democracy, our governance, the question of integrity, accountability, transparency, performance, freedom of speech, or the fear of speaking truth to power. In each generation, in each of these eras, we'll also examine how, where, when, and why we moved away from the community or village approach to raising a child, and away from the cooperative or could-be approach to developing our communities, and how, where, when, and why we moved into individualistic fringe elements, selfish personal interests, and away from focusing on unifying our people of all persuasions under one umbrella around the actions that must be taken to move our country and our people forward and to bring our governance, our economy, our society, and our cultural industries to greater levels of local, regional, and international competitiveness. We will then look forward to greater possibilities and making better choices after appropriate reformed electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations, followed by free and fair elections on a level playing field to restore Dominica's good name and governance at home, in the region, and globally from the consequences of the machinations of scandalous passport wheelers, dealers, and scammers, and to creating the enabling policy environment that will allow Dominicans to use their creativity and their hard work to improve their quality of life and living standards under a progressive government as they have done in the past. We will all look forward then to working in collaboration with whom we know to have the proven track record of performance, organization, requisite infrastructure on the ground to mobilize people for critically needed action to positively transform our economy and society and improve the quality of life, living standards of all of our people, regardless of their religion, their ethnicity, status, or political affiliations, following the passage of reformed electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations and free and fair elections on a level playing field. So, my guests, and you, our cherished listeners and callers, tonight, you will make the case for the urgency of arriving at a consensus now on the way forward for our nature isle and to move ahead to accomplish that objective with one crystal clear voice, one that we also say is called the people's power. I mean, lots of people power. My distinguished guest, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, the political leader, financial economist, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, and hopefully we'll be joined by Attorney Gabriel Christian a little bit later. They will share their views on these eras and give us their in-depth historical perspectives, the analysis, explanation, and understanding of the issues of the day. They will hopefully provide alternative approaches to finding consensus on actions that we must take now to secure a sustainable way forward for our governance, our energy system, our culture, our health system, and advancing our economy and society as a whole, based on the possibilities revealed from our past governance performances in past eras. So we all look forward to securing a new era of governance in an enabling policy environment that will stop the hemorrhaging in our economy, move it from crisis recovery, lift our people out of poverty and mendicancy, stabilize and enhance their daily livelihoods and living standards. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region and globally, please tune in, call us, join the conversation, get the answers to your questions, be part of the solution on the big station. So a huge shout out as usual to and hugs and love and appreciation and a big thank you to all our healthcare providers, our frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, and other public and private sector patriots at home and abroad. We welcome every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are tonight, in every nook and cranny, every village, in every community at home in Dominica, in the region, and globally. As always, we say thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air, and thank you, Lambi, on the console at Q95 directing the traffic. We will take your calls a bit later. The people's voice is always a priority on the Global View on Q. So call us anytime in the program, and Lambi will signal us to take your call. So let's get started. I'll get started by reminding Justice Dr. Irving Andre of these few talking points for ease of reference in getting the ball rolling with this first 7-minute presentation in our new program format. So help us to have Dr. Andre to rediscover our history, our past leaders, who they were, their values, what caused them to embrace politics, what did they seek to do, and what did they do while they were in office, what contributions did they make, what value did they add to our community, to our society, to our economy, and to our culture. What can we learn from the leaders of those eras after 45 years to help us make an unwavering commitment to becoming truly independent? So, Dr. Andre, please go ahead and make your first 7-minute presentation.
Let me say good evening to you, sir, and for inviting me on your program. Let me say good evening to the illustrious Dr. Fontaine. Let me say good evening to Lambi and to Showing and to all your listeners. Good evening. It is good that we are alive and we can listen, even if we may not agree with everything which is said. This topic proposed by Mr. G has a broad sweep. It is a topic which cannot be conversed in any meaningful way in 1 2 hour session. All we can do is to scratch the surface of this topic because there's so much to be said. And instead of starting by talking about some of these early leaders, what I will do in a series of statements describe to you where we are now. It is only if we understand where we are now that we can then look back and see what lessons that we have not learned. And it may explain why we are in the predicament that we are today. We are speaking on the eve of celebration of 45 years of life as an independent nation. Note that I didn't use the word independence because that might be a stretch of the imagination. And let me start with the following propositions in terms of where we are now. It is not a beautiful picture of a city on the hill, which we should have been glorying or we should have been very happy about. But it is one where, unfortunately and sadly, the values which we thought we would give birth and we would nurse from the 3rd of November 1978 and even before, the values which persons like Edward Oliver LeBlanc, Frank Barron, and the other, Mary Eugenia Charles, Mr. John Edison James, Oliver Seraphin, Pierre Charles, and others, they nurtured and they nourished. But this is basically what we're looking at as we speak. Today, we have elevated political victimization to becoming a cherished possession. Today, we have engaged in political idolatry to such an extent that the red calf is paraded around the streets of Roseau as if it is a new pagan god that mocks our Christian values. Today, we have ensnared and have held captive all the virtues and values of nationhood, and instead have let loose the vices of greed, avarice, and debauchery. Today, we have trivialized our citizenship and rendered it no more than an item for sale in the markets of Lebanon, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Today, we have transformed our passports into the bling-bling of oligarchs and persons with dubious pasts who are seeking entry to countries they would not be able to travel to. Today, we have dispossessed our people of their own ancestral lands, and that is what we have. That is the context in which we're having this discussion. We can start with the Chief Minister, Frank Barron, who had a very short term in office. He gained ascendancy in 1960, and he was ultimately defeated by Edward Oliver LeBlanc. And whether through political expediency or altruism, he certainly tried to, as best as he could, to enable persons of all political stripes to achieve a modicum of self-independence. Now, quite frankly, he was lambasted and excoriated because it was felt that he represented the wealthy sectors of Dominica. But the fact of the matter is this: universal adult suffrage came into effect in the first general election in 1951. Every politician who was worth his salt had to cater to the working population or face political death. So to that extent, and being an astute and a wily politician himself, he certainly instituted policies that would have inured to the benefit of many people who we typically regard as persons of working class origin. If you look around, Mr. G, many persons he assisted with scholarships under his tenure through the British gain the necessary skills to establish themselves in business. One of the most prominent examples is Edward E.H. Charles, who studied construction in Puerto Rico in the early 60s. He had the vision, at least under his tenure. The Melville Hall Airport had commenced. It was finished after Edward Oliver LeBlanc gained the ascendancy, but certainly it was initiated under his watch. The Goodwill Housing, not revolution, the Goodwill Estate was carved up under his watch. The Princess Margaret Hospital was built under his watch. Obviously, he cannot take full credit for these initiatives, but the fact of the matter is, whether, as I said, through a cynical effort to gain popularity among the working population, he certainly played a role in ensuring that these initiatives inured to the benefit of Dominica. Obviously, social change was accelerated through the advent of Edward Oliver LeBlanc. And it would take probably 2 or 3 sessions to talk in any great length about Edward Oliver LeBlanc. Instead of doing so, Mr. G, I'm going to read from that book I wrote about this great man a few years ago. There's 3 small sections, which in my view epitomized everything that we should know about this man. And the first quote I'm going to read is not from him, but from a poem by Derek Walcott, a brilliant St. Lucian poet who won the Nobel Prize for Literature before he passed away a few years ago. And here is a short verse in one of his poems, because it speaks volumes, not only to the philosophy of Edward Oliver LeBlanc, but to what obtains today. Here's what he says. I have no zeal to be Thane of Cawdor. Thane of Cawdor is like a potentate, someone with great power and great wealth, or an island's king. He had no zeal, no desire, no hunger, no appetite to be an island's king. That's what he says. And when you think of Edward Oliver LeBlanc, that is what you think of. And here's something he also said, quote, or he said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Obviously, it is not he's not the originator of that quote, but he's aligning himself with thoroughly. And he furthermore stated, quote, oftentimes, it is not politically healthy for any head of state to remain in office for more than 2 consecutive terms. If the leader so wishes, he can return after stepping aside for an undetermined period. But he understood very well the temptations, the enticements of being in power for too long. And even when he resigned in 1974, he had this to say, Mr. G, my decision may very well serve to establish a convention divorced from the constraints of constitutionalism, where leaders of government voluntarily retire after 2 consecutive, or 3 in my case, and after a complete term of rest from leadership, may return to serve if his services are required. So here is a man who, quite frankly, had not been seduced by the trappings of power. Here is a man who had not been corrupted by the specter of a burgeoning salary at a time when his own people could not sustain themselves. Here was a man who was not enticed by persons singing his praises. Here was a man who, quite frankly, felt no zeal to sell Dominicans' birthright. On the contrary, he enacted legislation to protect it. Here is someone who did not give away or sell the most cherished possessions of citizenhood, of nationhood, of islandhood, whether it's the Botanic Gardens, whether it's passports, whether it's the ancestral lands of villages or villagers. Here was one, not only did he express an aversion or he regarded these things as sacrilege, but he did everything to protect these instruments of a young nation in gestation. He had a complete disdain for the trappings of power. No one accused him of secretly giving himself a 33% raise. No one accused him of getting expensive gifts from mysterious funds or sources. No one accused him of having apartment buildings or apartments, whether in New York or in Dubai or in Guadeloupe or Martinique. Nobody accused him of having possessions in the name of relatives, macumes, or baby mothers. No one accused him of any of these things. And bear in mind, when he left, Mr. G, he had less than $100 in the bank. He had no mansion to retire to. He retired to the modest house by the sea so that he could delight in those pastimes that molded his very being. He had this symbiotic relationship with the folk because he was one of them. He understood their pain. He grew up in the same poverty in which thousands were mired. He offered hope because he felt that salvation for Dominica would rest on the efforts and the work of the working population. And so he had this genuine, altruistic, honest relationship with his own people. And his desire to transform them and to give them opportunities was as profound as that of any other leader. But my time draweth nigh, Mr. G. It is probably 6 minutes and 50 seconds since I commenced. So I will take my leave unless I am wrong about the time I have spent in this introductory remarks. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Andre. I know that there's a lot more that we're going to get from you tonight. You did, in fact, stay within your time. I mean, as always, you've been very disciplined. And I am pretty sure you picked that up from one of those eras, but I'm pretty sure a gentleman called Mr. Andre and Mrs. Andre also had something to do with it in the days when it took a village to raise a child. But Dr. Thompson Fontaine, I mean, you know, we are 45 years since we became, you know, we got self governance, 45 years. And we had recently our National Day celebrations. I'm not so sure exactly what we celebrated, but there was some song and dance about it. And I heard many promises being made, not things that have been done or in existence, but many promises of things that will be done after 23 years. As a matter of fact, I might want to get a comment from Dr. Andre a little later when he comes back on, because I did hear a message from Monsignor John Lewis, which I thought was very instructive in the way he analyzed our current situation. And I asked myself, really, how independent are we? To me, Dr. Fontaine, I seem to recall the days of Leblanc, as Dr. Andre was saying, when farmers, ordinary people, got very wealthy under his watch. They were able to buy their vehicles cash under his watch, send their children to school and paid for that. All right, send them to study. But today, we see a totally different thing. We see foreigners, as a matter of fact, we see a government boasting that foreigners and foreign companies were able to repatriate $213 million. That's what they were able to repatriate, but it means that they may have earned more like 300 plus million in order to repatriate 200 and something million. So Dr. Andre, let me just go to you to give us your initial thoughts as we get that. And I believe we may have to do a part two. This may have to be part two, as Dr. Andre said. I'm not sure we can cover every single thing and give the information, you know, in depth to these young people out there who really don't know much about those leaders in those eras. Dr. Fong, let me go over to you.
Mr. G, a very good evening to you, and of course to George Andre, Lambi, and to our many listeners, those are already on Facebook, and of course those who are listening across this beautiful island of Dominica and further beyond. It is a great opportunity. 45 years is a great time. I thank you for this program because it's an opportunity for us together to reflect on where we have been, where we are, and where it is that we are going. And looking back at the leaders that have ruled this country, going back even to Barron, we have basically 9 of those leaders. Unfortunately, all of the leaders, with the exception of our current leader and O.J. Serafin, all the others have gone to the great beyond. But it is interesting and important for us to look back a little bit. And I want to just go back in time and consider how the country evolved following self-representation when we took on with Barron first, and then after we became a crown colony, and then the transition to independence. And if you look at all of the leaders during that period, what we see is that those leaders were able to provide a foundation upon which the country could develop. So George Andre talked about Barron opening up Dominica with Melvin Oil Airport. We saw when PJ came with independence, he did his bit to move the country forward some more. Then before that, Libla opened up Dominica to the farmers with the opening up of feeder roads and so on that gave access to this all-important banana crop. And that basically was able to educate scores and scores, generations of Dominicans, including myself. I am a proud product of a banana farmer. And to be able to, with a very small plot of land, to be able to send 11 children to school and then to take care of our needs as children, it is all testimony to what those leaders were able to do. And there was a time when there was a great amount of hope in Dominica. As a child of independence, I was a schoolboy during independence in Dominica. And I remember the hope and the optimism that offered. I remember we were going places. I remember the vaunted public service in Dominica with great names, great permanent secretaries and great education persons in the area of education, luminaries, and just really great Dominicans who were committed during that time of independence with the guidance and the leadership of those leaders who were guiding Dominica along. And there was a lot of hope because the country was emerging. Dominica was on every metric. If you look at our education system, that was really above the rest of the Caribbean. Our level of professionalism, if you looked at even the economy of the country, we were far above many of our neighbors in terms of where we were, in terms of the ability to produce and then to export. At one time, in the heyday, when Mr. James was prime minister, exporting over $150 million worth of bananas, just bananas. And so many years later, our exports, instead of growing over time, instead of improving over time, our export levels have now sunk to less than $5 million a year. That, I think, is a very good indication of how far we've come. And if you compare, for example, the first 22 years of our independence, 22 years during which we had the various leaders of since independence, Patrick John, Oliver Serafin, Dame Eugenia Charles, Edison James, Rosie Douglas, Pierre Charles, those 22 years, or even before that, we had the 22 years that did not include Pierre Charles, because we can include Pierre Charles and Rosie Douglas in the last 23 years since the Labour Party took over in 2000. But if you compare that, it's a tale of two different countries. One, the first period where there was hope, there was optimism, there was economic development, there was growth on a constant basis. At that time, we were averaging close to 5-6% rate of economic growth every year, just the rate at which we needed to transform lives, to have this level of income and so on, that would build a strong and stable middle class, that would allow parents to send their children to school, that will allow that independence from government. People were making wealth was being created, money was meeting money, during that period. And now, if we compare that to now, where we are in a very desperate state, a period, by the way, in which we have had a lot more resources come to the country, not into the country, but to the country, because most of those resources, unfortunately, because of corruption, because of greed, because of malgovernance, all of these monies are now stashed away overseas. Foreigners are now given the upper hand over Dominicans. We have not been able to create for our people. We've had a mass exodus of the country. Can you imagine? The population of Dominica in 1980 was more than it is now. In 1980, our population was some 83,000 people. We are now down to some 70,000 people. We've had a mass exodus of people because of the current conditions under which we are governed. And so when you reflect, it is not something that I'm very happy about. It's not something that we can be proud of. There was a time when we were proud to be Dominicans, I can tell you, because Dominica was going places, a small island that just so much was being created. Even our education system, even the quality of scholars and the quality of people coming out of Dominica was so much to be desired, to be envied by the rest of the world. We've lost all that because we've lost our way. We moved from a position of being independent to a position of growing our own agriculture, manufacturing, doing all of those exports. We've moved from that to a position of dependence, when farmers now down their tools and instead have to go to their parliament or go to their prime minister for a handout. You cannot develop a country on that type of model. And that, unfortunately, is where we are. So in terms of leadership, if we are to look back at those leaders that we've had, the LeBlancs, the Edison James, the Mamo, and to some extent even Rusi, because when Rusi came into office in 2000, there was an element of hope. I think he had the support of the vast majority of Dominicans who believed that, given his sincerity, his honesty, that he could transform this country. Unfortunately, fate stepped in. We had a similar situation with Pierre Charles. When Pierre Charles, during his time as prime minister, he was honest, he was sincere, he was not corrupt, he gave his all for this country. So there was, even up to that point, there was still that element of hope that the country could move forward, because Pierre Charles was willing to work with everybody. He was willing to embrace all of Dominica. Now we've moved away from that to a government that has isolated itself, relying only on a few people around this government that have not done well by the people of Dominica. And so after 45 years, we have a lot to worry about. We have a lot to be concerned about. And I think it is time for us to really consider what we need to do as a people to take our country back and to bring us back to that period, that first, let's call it the first 23, as against the last 22.
And thank you so much, Dr. Thompson Fontaine. Dr. Andre, I really wanted you to, maybe if you have a moment as you come back here, you could, if you would like to just make some reference to that, to the message of Monsignor John Lewis, because I really thought it was very instructive, very inspiring, and it gave a sense of hope. It gave me a sense that, listen, all is not lost. I mean, there are people who are concerned and they're speaking out about it, and they're letting their thoughts be known, so the young people can get some guidance from that. But I wanted you to go back with us as well, back to Mr. LeBlanc, because as you said, there's so much to say about this man. He accomplished so much. I mean, the independence celebrations that we are having, now the rise of the culture. This man, to a large extent, led that era in doing all of this. Unfortunately, our cultural industries have not grown to the extent that they've become regionally and internationally competitive, where we can earn a lot more income from that. Obviously, there was an attempt made during the Edison James regime with the World Creole Music Festival to do something like that, which could have taken the culture out, brought it to the world, and allowed our local artists and artisans to get wealthy from that, let them become known. So our cultural industries have not grown. Then, of course, I'm sure there's a lot more you want to add. So I'll just go over to you and let you take it from there.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Edward Oliver LeBlanc embodied all that was wonderful, sacred, and special about our culture. I will not detail the types of initiatives he took in the 60s to resuscitate or to legitimize or normalize our indigenous culture. We know it. The music festivals, not so much festivals, but competitions, dance, the National Day, as opposed to Discovery Day, the proliferation of indigenous music throughout Dominica, the fact that he made it his business to ensure that in promoting Dominican indigenous music, dance, and culture, he gave persons, the majority of whom live in villages throughout Dominica, make them feel that they belong or they exist on an equal plane with everyone, particularly those who professed to be somewhat of a higher social bracket. So that is not the culture per se that was his goal, but using culture as a means to achieve an end, to elevate his people. And sadly, you make reference to what was started under the UWP regime, the World Creole Festival. I mean, today, it's a very poor shadow of its former self. In fact, what you have, in my view, quite frankly, we have the same type of idolatry, musically speaking, that we have with respect to our value system. Musicians from abroad are placed on a pedestal, financially and otherwise. Our musicians take second class, unless if they worship at the feet of what is called what? Nasty music, is that what they call it now? Nasty music, for God's sake.
Dirty business.
Dirty business. They've stolen shamelessly, in my respectful view, the worst aspects of Jamaican dancehall music and call it their own. And they've relegated the type of educational lyrics of whether it's the Midnight Groovers, whether it's Exile One, whether it's Gramax, and the other bands. They've relegated any type of music that elevates the soul, that teaches something. They've relegated it to the sidelines. And that is what we have here, because you see, we have this complex that to be validated, we have to sacrifice our own musicians on the altar of inferiority. But we're doing the same thing not only in the music industry, we're doing the same thing in the construction industry. We're relegating our professionals and workers to the sidelines. They're not good enough. They don't build apartment buildings which stink after 2 or 3 months. So they're not good enough. They don't work like the public work department used to work, building bridges which last decades. They don't serve Dominica as well. That's the thinking. So they are cast by the wayside. So we as an island nation, we've become our own worst enemies. Edward Oliver LeBlanc made it clear that Dominicans should be able to prosper in their own country. And I've given the example years ago in the 60s, when one foreign person who purchased a piece of land in Dominica's interior prevented a Dominican from having access to his land. Edward Oliver LeBlanc marshaled a, what did they call it, a Caterpillar DC3 or whatever it is? I don't know. I can't even drive a scooter, let alone a Caterpillar. But unilaterally, he got that Caterpillar to go up to Pontcassé and cut a road through this fellow's land to enable the Dominican person to gain access to his own property. And he did so without asking permission, without seeking some kickbacks, without seeking any bribery. But his philosophy resonated throughout the length and breadth of Dominica. Dominicans should be master of their own country, regardless of what walk of life you came from, regardless of how long you were here, but you were Dominican. And he sought to build a Dominica based on meritocracy rather than on political affiliation. One brilliant educator, former Cape Polydor, may her soul rest in peace. When he heard she was doing extremely well at the University of the West Indies, she graduated in the mid-60s or thereabouts with a first-class honors degree. He offered her a job while she was still at university. Today, we have qualified persons fleeing. Dr. Fontaine spoke about our population today as compared to what it was in the 1980s. It's not by coincidence. Didn't the UWP educate 20 doctors at one point, and they were denigrated and they were mocked, and many of these folk had to migrate to the proverbial greener pastures because they learned something they never learned in law school. A prophet is never welcome in his or her own home. That is a repudiation, it's a negation of everything that Edward Oliver LeBlanc stood for. And it's a negation of everything which other Dominican leaders have fought for. I mean, look at the housing projects of Patrick Rowland, of Edward Oliver LeBlanc in Caneville, Patrick all over the island, but including Bath Estate. Look at those which came after, whether it's under Seraphin, short-lived administration of Pierre Charles, built by Dominicans. Go ask the people in Bath Estate whether they own their homes. Go ask those people who continue to own apartments right next to the Roseau River built by the nuns. Some of them have passed on these commodious apartments to their children and to their children's children. They have title. It still provides them sanctuary. And that is the difference between what obtained then and what obtained now. Now the central criterion for development is very simple. We will only help you if you fall down and prostrate, if you bend your knees and you sing, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, thou is great. Hallelujah. And that is why we are stuck in this pit of despondency, destitution, and poverty. Thank you.
And Dr. Andre, before I let you go, let me just remind you that also in terms of Edward Oliver LeBlanc, let's not forget, and I want to compare that to what's happening now, maybe in the Wesley area and in some other areas. This man passed a law, I think it was called the Aliens Landholding Act.
Yep.
In which if you're a foreigner, you couldn't just come and just own land in Dominica.
Oh, absolutely. He limited ownership because, again, nationhood meant something. It meant something for you to be a citizen of your island. It protected you from the vicissitudes of the open market. It protected you from someone with a bloated back pocket simply coming into your land and buying you off. buying up your heritage and your inheritance. He made no secret deals. Now, there was a huge development scheme called Sunday Island Port Authority. But if we look at its constituent elements and so on, you can easily see that it did not involve the expropriation of Dominican land and simply handing it over to foreign owners. And it is probably by no coincidence that it failed. It failed. It did not come to pass. Now go tell the people from Wesley whether their situation came to pass. Imagine folks who have been dispossessed of their homes, their little gardens, today have to look at foreign person growing pigs under their homes, for God's sakes, establishing their own small city or village, while those who had been dispossessed are still waiting in vain for compensation for their own property. And that sad state of affairs was imposed upon them by their very own. That's the sad reality, Mr. G.
Dr. Thompson Fontaine, again, coming back to where we are now and then going back to where we were before, well, that's why I say something, we probably were a lot better off before in those eras. Here's what is happening if you look around Roseau. I will recall when I looked around Roseau before in terms of the retail sector. And nice to have you with us, Gable.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me just, I will introduce you in a minute, Gable, but I just wanted to say, Thompson, when we look around Roseau today, we see something that we never would have seen under Edward LeBlanc. You never would have seen that under Patrick John or under O.J. Serafin, on Eugenia Childs or Edison James. Why? Because we never saw it there. When I look around Roseau, you see all of the retail outlets that used to be owned and operated by Dominicans. They now have Chinese people in there. I mean, is that what it is? Edward LeBlanc put the Aliens Landholding Act to prevent people from just coming in willy-nilly and take over property and land and so on. He really was interested in people coming and invest, not going into retail selling chicken. So you have a situation now where all of those buildings, LeBlanc's boutique and, all its stores there, very nice boutiques. Dominicans are no longer in there. You have Chinese, and where are the Dominicans? They're on the sidewalks in Roseau on the tent over the drain. And when you have to pass the sidewalk, you're almost passing the drain. And that is where Dominicans are now. I'm just trying to put this thing to you, but you see the difference between the eras, what has happened in terms of our governance, what we are allowing. I have not seen Chinese people or investors coming and building factories to export water. You see, today we heard a big story about Antigua looking to buy water from Trinidad. I have not seen any factories come instead of water to make shoes or to make garments or to manufacture computer chips or anything like that. What I'm seeing is people coming to little retail that the same Dominicans can do. Your thoughts, Dr. Fontaine?
Mr. G, is like you read my mind, because I was thinking of that exact same thing. And I was just, kind of going through my mind where we were then, let's say the first 23 and now the last 23. In the first 23, imagine the number of businesses that we had. We are now 4,000 or so businesses, less businesses in Dominica in that last 20 years. We've lost all of our major manufacturers. We've lost DCP, that was huge in exports. We've lost Bello Products, that was huge in exports. We've lost the candle industry, that was huge in exports. We have had agro-processing industries. We've had this lime factory. All of those exports that we've lost. So if you look at the number of businesses, not only do we have the ownership of the few businesses changing away from Dominicans, but these were businesses that were run by Dominicans very profitably and were able to export. So we've lost that. We've lost the export. We've lost the jobs that came with that. We've lost, I said 4,000 jobs. I meant 4,000. I said 4,000 business. I meant 4,000 jobs that would have been lost on account of all of those businesses that we have lost over the last 20 years. Now, if you look at other major pointers, what about the banking sector? There was a time when we had 6 commercial banks in Dominica. We are now down to 2. When you look at the agriculture sector, our agriculture sector was vibrant. It was a hub of activity. We had our villages were alive and they were doing great. I remember a few years ago, when I was an economist at the IMF, I encouraged one of my friends to visit Dominica as a tourist. And she went to Dominica, one of my co-workers. And when she came back, she told me, I'm afraid to tell you, but your villages are dying. That was her comment. She told me then, that was in like probably 2010, 2011. She says, your villages are dying. And I said, yeah, they're dying because the lifeblood of these villages have been taken away. They have been stripped off. The lifeblood of the rural economy was always agriculture. And that was taken away from the people. So our people have been made destitute. Our farmers, once proud farmers, bringing in 3,000 a week in bananas and in other export crops, now have to go and work as security officers for a couple $100 a month. That is the contrast that we have. When you think of the number of schools and education facilities that were built during that period, the last secondary schools were built under the United Workers' Party government. A Labour Party government in office for 23 years has not built not one new school. Over that period, they've not made a major contribution to the education sector as was done previously. We had a situation before where it was all about meritocracy. In other words, you got rewarded based on your hard work. So within the public service, for example, PSs, the permanent secretaries, they earned their positions. They had to be the best. They had to be well-equipped. They had to be well-trained. They earned their position. This has been replaced with favoritism. Friends of the prime minister been granted those positions. And in the process, the entire public service has deteriorated to an extent where it is unrecognizable. If you compare the public service that we had then, the quality of services that were being offered. If you look at our health sector, in the 1980s and 1990s, Dominica was lauded or hailed across the globe as having probably the best primary health system in the Western Hemisphere. You would get good quality care. You'd be assured that if you ended up at the hospital, there would be treatment. Survival rates were extremely high. Infant mortality was almost a thing of the past. Now our infant mortality rates are skyrocketing. Persons who go, the survival rates at our hospital are out of this roof. Our health system has deteriorated to a point where people are afraid. People are prefer to take chances at their home with the cities than to go to the hospital. All of this, and I can give you example after example. Our rate of economic growth during those first 20 years, as I said, was 4 or 5%. The rate that you need to transform your economy, to create a strong middle class, to take the country out of poverty. Poverty rates were in the low teens. Today, poverty rates are close to 50%. Unemployment, another major measure in those few years, first 20 years of independence, unemployment rates were in the teens. Now our employment rates is above 50% in Dominica. I remember when I graduated from Sixth Form College many years ago, Every single one of those who graduated that year were employed within a few weeks. Every single one of us. In fact, I remember just one individual who took some time for whatever reason. There was only one out of all of us who graduated who took time to get a job. But the jobs were there. The opportunities were there. There were opportunities for young people to grow, to thrive, to dream. That dream is gone. The Dominican dream has vanished under this Dominica Labour Party government. And we need to reclaim that dream, Mr. G. We need to reclaim it because we did it before and we certainly can do it again. But to do that, we need to remove this obstacle in the road. As I keep saying, go wash like Yashimela. We need to remove that big pit and wash that is preventing the country from moving forward. And when we're able to do that successfully, remove that obstacle, that is the time when the country is going to move forward again. And that is when we're going to have hope being rebirthed and people are going to believe again in this great Dominica dream and what was offered when we got our independence.
Yeah, well, clearly, Thompson, you're quite right. And Gabriel, I wanted to come to you now because I know that you're otherwise engaged in some important assignments, and if you could not be with us earlier, but we're very happy that you're here now. Obviously, what we've been doing so far, Dr. Andre and Thompson, been sort of comparing what has been happening with different eras, or different leaders, different eras at different times, from Frank Barron all the way up to Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit now. And as Thompson was saying, in the first 22 years after we got, self-governance and so on, 22 years of independence, it seems to have been, life seems to have been better for everybody in every single way that you can think of than it is now the last 23 years, which brings us to 45 years of political independence. Certainly, as I said before, I do not think that in fact, I think we're more dependent now than we were before in those first 22 years. And we did, we did mention, in fact, what is happening if we look at Roseau and then in the rural areas. One of the things that all leaders in those eras did, Gibbon, I want you to comment on that when you speak, is that they built a middle class. The farmers all of a sudden became wealthy. These guys became the middle class. And for any economy to thrive, you have to have a good size, meaningful middle class.
Indeed.
Right? So that's disappearing now, obviously. And so let me just go over to you, Gable, so you can expand on some of that, your own thoughts.
First of all, a blessed good evening to you, Brother Sheridan. Thank you very much for your stewardship and your dedication to country. Truly like an old cadet. I know Irving and Thompson, maybe not being cadets, but they behave as if they were cadets, as was Lambie as well. Good evening to you, Lambie. And so I just want to say how much I appreciate seeing you, Thompson, and I appreciate seeing my brother there, Dr. Andre, and I will take a moment now to compliment him on the book launch, the revised edition of Rosie Douglas's book.
Yes, let me just, as you mentioned that, Gable, I must tell you, I had the privilege on the Saturday evening of being in that book launch.
Amazing.
It's quite something. And as a matter of fact, that book is a terrific book. I haven't finished reading it yet, but I mean, from the comments that I've seen,
yes,
by legal luminaries, I think this book, I think Black Caribbean history is in very, very good hands with people like Dr. Irving Andre.
Well, I might as well start there because one of the problems we have in Dominica is that I think it was Pierre Charles who said it, folks wear their badge of ignorance or they wear their ignorance as a badge of honor. I'm going to ask Irving Andre, he's now on the stand, he's not on the bench. Mr. Andre, sir, good evening.
Good evening to you. Good evening to you, Mr. Christian.
Thank you, sir. Congratulations again. Can you tell the listening audience, you've got two witnesses, you've got a jury of Thompson Fontaine, Sheridan Gregoire, and Brother Lambie in Master Control.
I've been convicted even before I say anything. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Whether or not any of the books published over the past 30 years by Poncassi Press, which, mind you, exactly 1 year ago, was embraced by no less an institution than the University of Toronto, which embraced our entire catalog but one book. And that one book was a book that Irving had put on the contract for reissue, and so he couldn't put that into the catalog. So the University of Toronto, which was attended by Eugenia Charles, and Dorothy Levy, and all Telford Georges, which has the biggest digital library in the world, embraced the catalog of Poncassi Press. Can you tell the Dominican people, Mr. Andre, Judge Andre, I might say, whether or not any of the publications of Poncassi Press are part or form part of any curriculum at our schools, high school, college, or elementary? And I'll wait until hell freezes over.
Well, all I can say is as though they're not, they're not, and for a number of different reasons. We understand it. Those who feel it knows it, as the old saying goes. But suffice it to say, Mr. Christian, it hasn't deterred you over the last 2-3 decades.
No.
It hasn't deterred you from continuing on that path of enlightenment that you have embarked upon. It hasn't deterred you that those who, for a number of different reasons, all too often political, seek to sideline you or minimize what you've done. The fact of the matter is, oftentimes, the praise that you receive is not from your own. And that is enough for me. I walk that road. What is the biblical verse which says that as
Prophets.
you walk through the valley of death, literally speaking, Gabriel Christian, you fear no evil, because if you had feared that evil, you would have put down your pen.
You see,
and you
Irving,
would be growing peas in Tobago instead of writing.
Well, Irving, the reason I chose to have you answer that question was not because I thought it was about me or you. Our friend, Dr. Fontaine, has written what I consider one of the most spectacular pieces of work on West Indian history on the Maroons of Dominica. And the reason I asked that question, it's not about myself or you or Dr. Fontaine. It's about the country. Because in the absence of a people having a sense of heritage, Churchill said, Winston Churchill, who wrote the history of the English-speaking people, you know what he said? He said, history will be favorable to me because I will write it.
That's right.
Okay? So here you have so-called the nation. What is going on in that nation? The nation is being sold from beneath our feet. The monies are being placed offshore. The prime minister is a world boss who really doesn't control much of anything because all the money, as you can see, is in the hand of one company called Montreal Management. No bid contracts. And so when I was speaking to a Dominican today who's in international development and who's also on the Catholic side, you know what that person said? The people are entranced. They are possessed me by demons. I suggest the demon is a demon of ignorance. The demon is a demon of selfishness. The demon is the demon of self-imposed blindness. Because if you're going to take the bar exam, you have to study the legal literature. If you're going to take an exam for a PhD in economics or maybe a master's in statistics, as maybe Thompson has, Thompson will tell you he has to study his statistics book. Statistics 1, statistics 2, some calculus thrown in there. You can't just show up at the exam. And we continue to believe in Dominica's context that we can grow a nation. Look, the people who were involved in voluntarism in the diaspora are not those jokers who went down and sold themselves to vote corrupt dictatorship on the backs of the Dominican people. They're people my age and others who were cadets. A lot of the young generation, I might tell you, are silent because they grew up in a corrupt culture where there was an absence of intellectual freedom, intellectual inquiry, and voluntarism and patriotic endeavor. And so they grew up in a culture, therefore, where they thought that every single thing they did, they had to be paid for it. It was Kelly Grano who, without any sense of shame or dignity, went on stage and said, you know what, you got to scratch my back. Isn't that what he said? I saw the video. You've got to scratch my back. He's telling that to the people in the Carib territory or the Kalinago territory who've been impoverished over 20 some odd years, who have some of the worst indices, some of the worst roads, who are disregarded, whose money from the Hugo Chavez government disappeared. And they're still there, where a former MP saying, I've got to scratch your back so you can scratch my back, while you scratch mine, I scratch yours. That is the idiocy, the ignorance, and the illegality that is embraced in Dominica. So it's not a demon as in the devil with a pitchfork coming and pricking you in the behind with it. It's the demon of ignorance, self-imposed and accepted, where you have teachers who are graduates of university who are not insisting that the school curriculum reflect the imperatives of an independent nation so that we know who we are and where we came from. Let me speak to you a moment about this and the China question, because I'm going to hit the China question head on. Nobody can talk to Irving Andrian about China because we studied China when we were in the Popular Independence Committee. We studied Mao Zedong. And you know what the Chinese were fighting against? The Chinese, whether you like them or not, were fighting against foreign occupation. They were fighting against the domination of their nation by Western nations. There were signs in Shanghai in the Western concession which says, no dogs or Chinese allowed. They felt that they'd been put beneath the West. And so they made a revolution. Today in Dominica, we are accepting what the Chinese would never accept in China. Let me repeat what I just said to you and to the man on the mansion in a hill and the president who is in the $26 million Chinese palace. China, listen to me carefully, Dominicans, would never allow a foreign nation to build its presidential palace. The Chinese built the Great Wall of China by themselves. The Chinese built the Great Hall of the People in Beijing by themselves, with their architects, with their engineers, with their intellectuals stuck in the libraries. The Chinese go all over the world today, populating countries in the world with something called the Confucius Center, preaching the philosophy of China. The Chinese study Chinese history, the Qing dynasty and the Ming dynasty and all of that. And that sense of self and that sense of heritage, that sense of patriotism and belief and love of China for Chinese is what has made China today a great nation, whether you like it or not. And today you have a puppet regime which does not even understand Chinese history. We do, because we studied that history. In fact, I'll go further. Sheridan, you're from Grand Bay? When we go to Grand Bay to Tête l'Allée, that's where the library was. When we stepped into the library in 1977-78 with Rosie Douglas, you know what was on the wall? Let me tell you what was on the wall. There's a huge portrait of Mao Zedong, because we had the Red Book. We used to study what did the Chinese do to get to where they were. Not because we necessarily wanted to replicate it, but we were studying Frantz Fanon, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, and Chairman Mao. So in 2007, at our own expense, and I'll tell this to Dominicans for the first time so you can hear it from me, because it's not about just criticizing, but contributing. We took Alec Lawrence and Bernard Sylvester. Irving knows them. Thompson knows Bernard Sylvester. Remember when we used to go to New Jersey, Thompson? What were we going to New Jersey to do, Thompson? Can you tell Dominicans?
Absolutely. We'd go to New Jersey to work with them to promote the culture, Dominica culture.
And who were the judges of that?
The heritage, and to judge the cultural shows from Dominica. Yeah.
So we got to know him, this Sylvester gentleman, his wife Angie, very well. And so the law office had a Chinese client called Kevin Chung from Hong Kong. And so I said to Kevin, after many years of representing his business, I want to go to China, but I want my own Chinese. He had grown up in Hong Kong. And we went, you know what we went to? Sheridan, I want you to use that letter to your fullest extent. It's now in the public domain. Share it with Dominicans. I sent it to you tonight. It was to one Roosevelt Skerritt, who was in office now going on 3 years, almost 4. And I said to him 3 things. A Dominica technology pack where Dominicans would partner with Chinese that they brought for our purposes, to train folks at the SMA, to train folks at the PSS, to train folks at the DGS in electronics engineering and electronic assembly, Sheridan Gregoire, for a company called Nature Island Industries. Because I said to Alec and I said to the Prime Minister, who I gave a book by Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore called Singapore from Third World to First World in 25 years. Lee Kuan Yew was a man of rectitude. The first family he had investigated for corruption was his family. He was a man of transparency and accountability who made a country that in 1960 had lower per capita income than Jamaica. In 2023 is a first world nation with one of the highest per capita incomes because they had leadership that was transparent, that was accountable, that believed in rule of law, that believed in development, that government was not to enrich the personal coffers of a prime minister and his friends, but was to enrich the society. And so we went to China with a mind to bring back with us factories on our back. We brought samples to the cabinet of televisions, flat screen, personal computers, laptops, hair dryers, CD and MP3 players to be assembled in Dominica by Dominicans, following the Singapore model, so that in 5 years, we would have a light industry to sort of replace what we've been losing in the banana and citrus industry, which was in diminution, but not to give up on our agriculture. Sheridan Gregoire, Judge Andre, Dr. Fontaine, Master Control Lambert, all the samples which were placed in Sean Douglas's office, and I'm not blaming Sean Douglas for this, one by one disappeared. And the project, which would have cost just $250,000 US, not even $1 million US, to do what is called CKD or SKD. CKD means complete knockdown. SKD means semi-knockdown. So that means you would get the components in the container, we would assemble it in Dominica, put our label on it, but in 5 years, we'd be able to innovate. We'd be able to create, because that's what Singapore did. Singapore started by assembling things from Motorola and Philips Electronics, Philips that is, and Sanyo, and Toshiba. And in a few years, Singapore had started now with its native intelligence, their technical colleges to do their own thing. That was the vision for Dominica. And we put our monies where our mouths are, went to China. Now that was never embraced. And now you have Chinese who have pushed Dominicans out. Our parents built their home during the Labour Party period of Eole Blanc. You know what they did? They bought a plot of land. The government didn't build a house for our parents. All the people on Didier Lane and Libya Lane, they bought their land. They got a local architect to design the house and a local contractor to build the house. This is 50 years ago. 50 years ago, that's how it was built in Canefield. That's how it was built in Santa Roma and in Goodwill. So 50 years ago, Dominicans could buy their land, get a construction engineer to construct the house based on a plan, get a local architect to draw the plan up, and today we can do it. Today our people are totally sidelined, so we have lost our independence. We have lost, the government of Dominica has gotten out of the hands of Dominicans. This is the bottom line this evening. This is not politics, and with all due respect to my brother Thompson Fontaine, there is no Labour Party in Dominica. Let me just be blunt. There is a one-man band. When last have you heard from a Minister of Agriculture talking about anything? When last have you heard from a Minister of Communication and Works, as you used to hear in other governments? In other governments, you'd hear from different ministers. You'd hear from Mike Douglas. You'd hear from O.J. Serafin. You'd hear from Ronan David. You didn't call anybody a drumstick. You'd hear different ministers speaking about their ministries. Is that what we have now, Thompson Fontaine, Judge Andre, or Sheridan Gregoire? We have one man. They've not had a party conference. They don't have any constitution to speak of that people can speak about, or any philosophy of social democracy. All shall eat. Is that what we have in Dominica? All shall eat, or some shall eat all. So this is the reality. And I just wanted to be the case that we must stop thinking simply that it's the devil, as in the devil with a pitchfork trying to stick someone behind. It's the devil of acceptance of culture. It's the devil of, or the demon of acceptance of lawlessness. It's the demon of ignorance. It's the demon of allowing ourselves to beg on social media for a ticket because we are so impoverished you cannot afford your own ticket to a show. You have to wait for your pal rep to give you a ticket. And when you don't get it, you go and you beg on social media. This is the sort of debasement of a nation. And if it does not anger anyone to then take constructive action of coming together to remove this cancer, we have no hope.
So thank you for that initial contribution there, Google. Thompson, I need to go back to you before I go back to Dr. Andre, because I want you to take off from where Gabriel left off. I mean, I remember you first saying a moment ago how we lost so many industries, right? In that second part of our independence, the last 23 years. We lost, I mean, in addition, all those you mentioned, there's plenty more, you know. There's Paul Plastic, Paul Pastoroni, there's Ben Shoe, there's all kind of industries. There's a lot. Don't forget, we lost Ross University. We lost a lot of things. You had Rose Agro Products, you had the essential oils industries. All of those people we lost, and that made up the 4,000 jobs that you're talking about that we lost. And there's like this mass exodus of maybe over 10,000 people that left the country because these jobs were lost. But I think what I'm hearing Gabriel saying is that we're supposed to have a friend in China. And if you look at what the initiative that was taken there, to go to China and look at what we could have done in some industries, as I was saying earlier, I do not see any Chinese people coming and opening factories. I see them opening retail stores and selling chicken, selling shoes and so on in the little stores that Dominicans used to do. But in addition to that, Thompson, I wanted to address your thoughts to this.
Yes, sure. You know, and I'm glad Gabe raised that, because it shows you what kind of government we have now. Because that is a project I remember very well when Gabe was working on that particular project. I remember very well the opportunity that presented to have Dominicans employed in that sector. But I'll give you another story about the Chinese. A few years ago, myself and Honorable Lennox Linton, we had a discussion with the then Chinese ambassador, because we had gone to talk to him about how the Chinese government can help Dominica in the export to export. And then the Chinese ambassador then says, you know what? I am so fond of this product. You have a product, coal pot soap. He says, every time I return to China, I take 3 or 4 boxes with me back to China so I can give as gifts to my friends, because this is one of the best soaps I've ever seen. And then we made a special request to the ambassador to ask him if he could help find a market for these types of products that are being produced in Dominica on a local level. And the ambassadors told myself and Honorable Lennox Linton that he had never had this conversation with the government of Dominica. He'd never had a conversation as the ambassador about what we were talking about, which was to get Dominica produce to China. So that, yes, once we accept Chinese goods, at the same time, quality products being produced in Dominica would find a market in China. And while he was willing to discuss it, obviously we are not in office. We were hoping to have won the election and we would have pursued it. But it tells you where this government is. It tells you a government that is completely uncaring. And that is the difference. If we compare the leaders down the line, you know, even if people talked about Mam Watson, but she had a concern about the people of Dominica. You know, when I went to school under Dame Eugenia Charles, they did not ask me who my parents voted for. My father was a Labour writer at the time. That did not prevent them from giving me a scholarship to go and study at UWI, because they were looking at what you could offer to the country. And we've moved away from that. So, you know, Mr. G, it is heartbreaking when you think of the number of jobs that have been lost. And when you think of what we can produce in Dominica. I have seen excellent products in Dominica. I have seen creams. I have seen handmade soaps. I have seen packed, people are packing fish and vacuum packing fish. I have seen vacuum packed smoked meat. And none of that is finding the export market, because this government has simply refused to empower the people of Dominica. Instead, it has made it its duty to impoverish. And that's a big word to mean that it has made it its duty to make people poor, as Gabe said, so that they can go on social media and beg for a ticket, a $40 ticket to go see a show. I mean, that is what the country has become. That's what our country has been reduced to. A country that offered so much hope when we got our independence. A country that, you know, you had everywhere around you in Dominica. There were examples of hard work, of industry. You would see those ladies carry the bananas on their heads. You would see them down at the Foncole port, rushing back and forth. You know, industry. You would see them at the packing shed in Goodwill, packing the grapefruits and so on. You would see them up at Elrose factory, packing the lines. There was industry everywhere around you. There were examples of hard work, of industry. Now people spend their time and their energies going to beg for favors from the government. And that is where we are. You know, and that is what our country has been reduced to after 45 years of independence. And for all right-thinking Dominicans, for all of us who are conscious of what we were and what we can still become, let us determine in ourselves to make a change and to get rid of this government. We have to push this government aside. We have to remove this government. It has not worked for the people of Dominica. The only thing we've done successfully in the 23 years is to mint potentially $1 billion in Dominica. So now buildings are going up all over the place. Multi-million-dollar buildings have been built, and nobody seems to understand where it's coming from. But these are the monies from the sale of passport using to do this, and it's not working for the people of Dominica. So, you know, it is a mindset. It is a mindset, and you have example after example where this government has simply refused to work in the best interest of the people of Dominica. And that to me is the most concerning thing about our current regime. Because if you compare this regime with previous governments, it was about how can we encourage development, how can we build a middle class? And that is what we will do, a United Workers' Party government. That is what we are prepared to do. The same way we have been talking to the Chinese about getting Dominica produce out in China. We've been talking about industry, how we can grow different industries, how we can bring back foreign direct investment, how we can bring back a vibrant business sector, how we can help small businesses, how we can generate growth within the private sector. All of those things we're engaging ourselves with now, because we believe that when the opportunity presents itself to be in government, that is the direction in which we will lead. That is where we'll go. A concern first for the people of Dominica, a concern about giving every single Dominican an honest chance at life, the young people in particular, provided jobs that will take them away from this dependency, from this idleness, from this hopelessness. Our young people are encased in a cloak of hopelessness because they don't see a future ahead of them. And that is what we are fighting. That is why I have offered myself in politics, to make that difference to the people of Dominica. Because I understand what the future was, what the future can be, and what the past was, and what we can be in Dominica. And that is why I commit to this fight, Mr. J.
Well, and I'm sure that Dominicans are happy to have you in the fight, because I think for too long now people have been saying, what happened to all our intellectuals? What happened to all our trained people, all our experienced people? Are they coming to join the fight to take us out of this situation? I'm glad that you're in it. Now, Dr. Andre, as we talk about, these eras and these governments and these leaders from Frank Barron all the way up, through Patrick John and O.J. Serafin and Eugenia Charles and Edison James and so on. We look back at those first 22 years in that era there, and we saw the number of factories and business initiatives that were there at the time, and thousands of people employed, and the country was exporting stuff. I mean, DCP was exporting. There was a plant in Bath Estate that was crushing grapefruit and sending the concentrate juice to Puerto Rico. That was here as well. I mean, all of these things were exporting. We used to export water. Boats used to pull up by the port, and then they fill them up the cruise ships and fill them up with water. We used to make water in Dominica and beers and all those kind of things. Today we're not. So here's what I wanted to ask you to do for us, Dr. Andre. When you compare this era, what was happening then with those leaders, from Barron, as I said, to James, we see what is happening today we hear a government that said agriculture is a has-been industry. We heard that. We did not hear Barron say that. We did not hear LeBlanc say that. We did not hear Edison James say that. But we heard it from this regime in office. Agriculture is a had-been industry. We also heard that if not passports, then what? You know, we've exported all of these industries that we had, getting foreign exchange, creating jobs, and we said, if not passports, then what? We have not heard any talk about the knowledge industries. See what Gable is talking about, trying to the assembly plants and so on. And Dr. Andrew, try to bring us up to speed, and let's do the comparison in those eras and what we have today.
Well, the comparison or the differences can be summarized in 2 sentences, Mr. G. The era of leadership from the late 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they were governed and animated by those memorable words of John F. Kennedy: ask not what you can do for yourself, ask what you can do for your country. And sadly, what we have today is a total reversal of that philosophy. Today, the governing creed is ask not what you can do for your country, ask what you can do for yourself. Now, don't take it from me, Mr. G, because you remember what Ali Monfared's business associate said in that expose on Al Jazeera, speaking of the Dominican leaders who exposed themselves in such, well, they exposed themselves, their morals or lack thereof. And he lamented and he noted with disgust, it is 10% for the country and 90% for themselves. And in this one sentence, he told us everything we need to know. Because he exposed that this love and obsession with selling us passports has one justification: the extent to which you can fatten yourself. That's why properties are being bought all over the place with mysterious funds. That's why Lennox has brilliantly exposed the amount of money from the net proceeds of sailors' passports languishing in mysterious funds, in mysterious accounts in Europe, controlled by whoever runs MMNCC or whatever the name is. That's why. And that's why the European says, well, look, one of the conditions we are seeking with respect to the sale of passports from these Caribbean islands is that the net proceeds should be deposited into the consolidated fund of each country. And that is why you have these pronouncements, if not passports, then what? Because, Mr. G, it gives them a window to have access to monies that should go into Dominica's consolidated fund. That's the attraction. It's not to develop Dominica. We know that I'm not an engineer, but you've all heard the reports about the quality of homes being built. And if it's designed to uplift the condition of Dominica, why is it that persons are not even being given titles? Mr. G, some time ago, a few weeks ago, months, I think, I was on your radio station being interviewed by Matthias Peltier. And when I left, a gentleman came up to me wearing a shirt and tie, and I said, Jesus, he must be an undercover cop. What is he here for? You know, certainly not me. I told him, I know a couple of things about the law. And he was the son of a labor supporter who had been on radio. I don't even remember his name. I only knew him by his nickname in grammar school. A gentleman called Monster B. He was stricken by a rather debilitating illness and he passed. He was living in one of these apartments. And this brother lamented to me bitterly that he heard me on the radio and he had to come to your station to tell me because I had indicated that within 24 hours of the death of these folk, they took the keys for the apartment. He told me I was wrong. It's within 2 hours. And he told me a few operatives, particularly those on radio. One may even be Gabriel's family. They said, give me Skerritt's keys. They didn't even give him an opportunity to remove his own possessions or belongings from the apartment. And we've heard anecdotal stories, Mr. G, of persons residing in these apartments who've made it clear they cannot even complain publicly about the shortcomings of their existence, the stench from poorly built and constructed units, sewage. They have to endure it in silence. And that is the cost of development that exists as we speak. So, but if you look at it from one overarching principle, these are being built at inflated costs. And the question is there any kickback or kickbacks, or are there any kickbacks being paid? You remember, Mr. G, when a bridge was built in Roseau years ago? The official version was that the cost was $18 million. And there was some engineer or someone with an engineering background who may now be in the House. He said actually it should have cost no more than 12. And the question, Mr. G, he who sits in the parliament, where are you now? Where are you now? And remember, Mr. G, if we go back to 2004 when Pierre Charles died, and some senior counsel talk about the hand that was outstretched from Pierre Charles' skeletal fingers as his hat was failing. He reached out in fear. He reached out for help. And what did this counsel say? Nobody offered him a help. And let me ask the question, Mr. G, where is he now? Those who decried corruption before, where are they now? If I may borrow a phrase from Shakespeare, they are living in the rank sweat of an esteemed bed, laden with corruption. That's where we are now, my friend. That's where we're now. It's like comparing cats and dogs. They're too different, totally different. And that is why we're here where we are today. Ask Thompson, ask Danny, what happened to that budding little company they had, buying Dominican produce and selling it to the French. Ask them what happened, whatever happened to it. I don't know. I can't remember. What happened to it? They were sabotaged. They were sabotaged by those in authority who were charged with the responsibility of getting markets for Dominican produce. Some of them went around telling Dominicans, don't sell to these people. Don't sell to the opposition. But God, it works in strange ways. And as Pastor Rodney oftentimes says, you shall reap what you sow. One has lost his voice. I wonder why. We do not wish ill on anyone. But if the Bible is correct, you shall reap what you sow. So even modest efforts over and outside the ambit of government is being sabotaged. Go ask Danny again. What about the funds given by an Australian company to develop the Goodwill Savannah? They sabotaged it. They sabotaged it because they didn't want the opposition to claim credit for any initiative which improved the lives of Dominicans, whether in the sporting industry or whether in industry or the agricultural industry. Only they shall eat, Mr. G. And that is why persons are afraid because the axe of retribution is being wielded in a vicious way. And people have to take cover from the arc of that axe. Thank you.
Yes, and Thompson, I don't know whether you want to add a little bit to what Dr. Andre said about the actual project that you try to engage in some experts, because as he said, I mean, those who are charged with the authority and the responsibility to actually find markets seem to have been opposing your efforts, your initiative to export.
Yeah, but not only opposing, but to go to the extent that they did. Dr. Andre talked about asking Dominicans not to sell to us, but beyond that, they went to the buyers in Martinique and tried to stop it. I've never gone publicly with that, but they went to the buyers and tried to sabotage the market. You know, that is the extent to which they were prepared to go. You know, to take away food from the mouths of the Dominican public, and like they were hurting me in the process, you know. But it is really sad. But again, it goes back to a government that is not caring. In fact, any government, any prime minister that would live in a $64,000 mansion where the majority of public servants probably get less than $2,000 a month to live on. In other words, they'll have to work for 5 long years every day, every night, to make that money that he pays in 1 month. Any prime minister, anywhere in the world that can do that is not deserving of being prime minister. And it shows his heart. It shows where his head is. It shows that he has complete disregard for the people of the state, for the people of government, complete disregard. And somehow, you know, what is really perplexing about this is that this prime minister has somehow convinced a large number of Dominicans that he cares deeply about them. But look at the record. That's not care. That's not love. To have this type of
Gable, can I ask Gable to turn off his mic a little bit?
You know, it is, and it is really sad and you know, Mr. G, but that is where we are. You know, I want people to think of how we can get out of where we are and give Dominica a chance to breathe. The country needs a chance to breathe again, and that is what we offer. That's the kind of leadership that I put myself up to offer to the people of Dominica, that the country can breathe again, that the focus will not be on leaders, it will not be on those in power, but on the people of Dominica, to be able to earn a living, to be able to build up a strong middle class. I want the young people of Dominica to make money, to be able to earn, to have good paying jobs, to be able to start businesses, that they can export their produce. I want our farmers to be able to sell their produce. I want us to be able to build the water factories and to build all of everything that would allow us to grow this country to in a place and in a position that would provide for the people of Dominica, not take away from them. If a $64,000 mansion, you know, can you imagine Edward Oliver LeBlanc doing this? Can you imagine? I mean, he left with I think it was $48 or something like that, $40.12 in his bank account. That's where we are, Mr. J.
Well, that's where we are, I think, unfortunately, because as we said before, and by the way, Dr. Andre, how much was exactly that Mr. LeBlanc left office with in his account? I think it was something like, was it $60-something?
$68.12. It's something either 60-12 or something.
But you see, Mr. LeBlanc came to office, he had his home, and he never left his home. He maintained his humble home. He had all his kids there, a wonderful family. And this man spent all his, and then he went back to his home.
And the same thing with PJ, the same thing with Honorable Edison James, the same thing with Mamo, you know, the same thing with, you know, so it's a different breed, a different creature we're dealing with.
Well, this is what I was trying to say, because you see, as you said, those who are charged with the authority to do certain thing. I mean, Frank Barron, Patrick John, Edison James, all this, they were focused on the people, not on themselves. All right, you can see the way they left office as they came to office. They were not, They were not looking to be lavish and to do all kind of live in the lavish lifestyle. But what is even worse, Gable, is that these people who are charged with the authority and responsibility to find markets, which is very important for us because we are basically an agriculture country. This with the natural resource basis, that's what we have. And the fact of the matter is we have lots of plants. We have lots of herbs and spices and produce that you can add value to them by processing them and packaging them and exporting them to markets where the world wants them and the world is willing to pay for them. I'm pretty sure that we can do that in a very economic way, a cost-effective way. But instead of that, we seem to be trying to prevent other people from exporting if we don't like them, while at the same time, there's such a vast potential for those exports of those products there, for these processed goods as well as the natural organic produce. And Gable, let's talk about that a little bit, because I think we've missed a serious opportunity in terms of what other countries have been doing with their agriculture.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Sheridan. Dominica is a small country which has great agricultural potential because we have water and fertile soil. Let me repeat, folks. We have water and fertile soil. Well, on behalf of Rebuild Dominica and the Academy, we took the Carib chief, Charles Williams, to the Negev desert in Israel. We saw them growing citrus in the desert with drip irrigation. Dominica has fresh water. And so we tried to do a chocolate industry, a cocoa industry in Dominica. We didn't talk about it. We put our money where our mouths are. And not one finger was raised to help prosper that. Just like with Thompson's and Danny Lugay's experience. And today, chocolate is considered a health food, a superfood. And we have some of the best cocoa in the world. So I give thanks at this point in time to Dr. Davidson Lloyd and our brother Errol Emanuel and Major Francis Richards, Sam Christian, Dexter under Greg Thomas back then, who worked with us. And who I think all of them would be willing to continue to work with us if we had a government like there is in the Netherlands. The Netherlands, which is one of the smallest countries in Europe, is the second largest exporter of food in the world after the United States. That it could fit into more than 200 times. Second largest. And because they don't have any land to speak of, they have started to go to robotics and to vertical farming. That is, they have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-story buildings where they have hydroponics. They're creating their own manure and their own soils and water and computer-driven stuff. And they are the second largest exporter of food products in the world. So what does this tell us? When the mastermind says that if not passports, what? It's because he was never schooled in industry. I carried cane. When we came to DD Lane in 1970, there was cane at Yam Peace. There was cane where all the old Deepwater Harbor was. There was cane in the Roseau Valley. I carried cane. I carried bananas as a Roseau boy, but my parents were country people. I carried citrus. When we were at the Goodwill School, the citrus trucks on Boxing Day would go all the way down to Rockaway under the cliff coming up. Lambie, you remember that? Lambie's he's a younger man than me. He doesn't remember those things. Sheridan, as for you, I'm not sure if you remember those things. Irving, I think, was there. We would eat citrus until our teeth, Sheridan. They would call it in Patois when Sezi.
Glassy.
Well, thank you very much.
Glassy.
Well, you see, the Patois is beating me, I know. On the heavy attack. Glassy. On edge. And of course, when you went to the restroom, there's no substance there. I don't want to be colorful, but the reality is the productivity in our nation was so high, that there would be fellas would be throwing grapefruits at the fellas. I mean, when the sluice gates at Elrose opened up, Lambie can tell you, the Roseau River would smell of lemonade, Peel going all the way down to the sea. And so we have, and that's why writing is so important, because if you were born in Dominica in 2000, you don't know any of those things. And so if nobody takes the time to have a radio program like this, so Dominicans can learn about when Dominica was Dominica and not a failed state under a one-man band regime, the world boss, then we would not know, you see. So it's important to have, as again Churchill said, history will be kind to me because I will write it. We have to write our history. We have to know our history. We have to write essays. We need to have symposia. We need to have radio programs like this to educate people away from the nonsense that is allowing for our people to not understand the importance of agriculture, of industry, and good government.
Can I interrupt you 1 second? I'll come back. Let's take a call from Landy.
Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please, with your call.
Good evening, Dominica. Good evening, my heroes.
Yes, sir.
See how poor, ignorant, wicked, selfish, and lack of knowledge Skerrit is. Skerrit went to Trinidad where he was accepting chairmanship of CARICOM. This man has the entire CARICOM countries in front of him. Almost 6 million people. And he said, by Trinidad, by Guyana, by St. Lucia, we have water in Dominica in abundance, the world wants. This man never said to buy Dominica water. Today, the opportunity could have met us where they could have had Dominica in mind. We hear now Antigua going back to Trinidad, where can tell them to buy and buy water and not Dominica. After 23 years in power, you're telling me Dominicans, teachers, nurses, doctors, scholars in the land, a man cannot point on one industry to push his country forward. And all you tell me, all you sit down and support in that is good. Dominicans to measure stay. Tell me a man like Skerrit, 43,000 passports. Up to today, you cannot tell people what you do with the money, who have the money, how much you get from the passport, and we sit down and we take that. 23 years, who was 20 years when Skerrit take power? They have been gray hair today. What Dominicans don't understand, if you go to a bank at 40 years for a mortgage, they will give it to you, but they will ask you a lot of questions. So as far as I see it, Dominica going to have a treasure of poverty because Skerrit has already blind a generation already. And this is really, really sad. God bless Dominica. Thank you.
And thank you for that contribution. Really appreciate that. Now, Gable, isn't it curious that in fact we are the chair of CARICOM? Antigua has had a water problem for many, many years now. It's not something new. Antigua has been toiling in that issue for a very long time. Obviously, there must have been discussions between the CARICOM heads about different issues on how they can collaborate and trade with each other and exchange commodities. It baffled me when I read in the news today, we had a story on that Gaston Brown seemed to have been gone to Antigua, gone to Trinidad to look for water for Antigua. You want to take another call, Landy, before I go to Gable?
Yes, caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, gentlemen, blessings to you all, and I want to be brief, so I need to condense my contribution. Dr. Andre, Gabriel, everybody, Dr. Thompson, should I say Dr. Sheridan as well? Anyway,
no. Just say the little pleb from Granby.
Okay, Papa. Gentlemen, just quickly, remember during Pierre Charles' reign, Skerrit was a junior minister who absconded and went to Barbados, the Sharpie, and he went to Barbados to meet a Chinese premier or the Chinese premier. I mean, let us not forget, but let us leave out of it what happened to Rosie Douglas. Was he murdered by some world intelligence? We don't know. But the death of Pierre Charles after Skerrit return and all the pressure, they talk about Tony Astafans concluded he have no doubt that he was driven to his grave. He was murdered by the same people that are making waves in Dominica. Anyway, to cut a long story short, Skerrit went to Makushwi and said that it's 2050. He's going to retire from politics. And he, in a little subtle insinuation, he mentioned his son Dimitri is not even 22 or 23 years. For Skerrit to fulfill his delusional dream of remaining there for all his life, the people need to be impoverished and disempowered. And that's what he's working on. Skillfully, and the Chinese are voluntary participants in the whole agenda. So what Skerrit has done is lit the phoenix ablaze, and it is burning. When it is down to the ashes, the Chinese are going to raise that phoenix up from the ashes with more power, with more control, with more information about the memorandum of understanding. A man as a lunatic, inexperienced and idiotic rushed to China, move away from Taiwan, sign diplomatic relationship with the Chinese, and a Chinese woman was his interpreter. We know not what it entails. So what is happening when the Chinese are taking over the tongue? That is a tongue, that is not a city. The stench, the dilapidated state in which this, what I just say, tongue is in. You can refer to that as a city, all right? So when we watch what is playing out, do not be distracted, because Skerrit is just a distraction to turn away, to deflect attention from the real, well, he's an enemy, but the Chinese. And the Chinese are doing a damn good job. I am on the ground and I'm seeing the Chinese buying a lot of lots and building in Roseau, plus what they're buying secretly. And in the interior, look at what is happening in Wesley. So it's a double whammy. It's a two-edged sword with the tip pricking as hell. And we in Dominica, we are quite fragmented. And all liquor fragments think, well, they can save Dominica in the fragmentation. I would say a lot, but in the interest of time, I try to engage Audrey, where I am seeing the bourgeoisie and the country bookie is coming back. And it's not coincidental. It's not accidental. It's by design with the aiding and the betting of the Chinese. Gentlemen, thanks for service to country. Thanks for service to humanity.
Before you go, blessings, let me just say, happy for your contribution. Only one little thing I would suggest, that I don't recall Tony saying that anything about somebody murdering anybody. So you might want to look at that, because I'm not sure that I remember him saying that he stretched your hand out and they bit the hand and they were biting his hand.
He was driven to his grave. He has no doubt. I take that back, Mr. Jane. Looking for no liability to the radio station and whatever. They can crucify me when they're ready, but I want U95 to be protected. Thanks for the correction, sir. God bless.
No, you did well. I like the contribution. Now, Gable, Lambie, you don't have a call for us. I want to go back to Gable. Gable, I mean, you really have started out talking about all this. I mean, when we think about it, really and truly, are you telling me that we're in government there for 20 years? We're now in CARICOM for 20 years, and we cannot even find a way to discuss it for our colleagues, that we have water that we can sell. I mean, we have gallons and thousands of gallons just running into the sea every day, just wasting. Absolutely nothing being done. You want to take another call, Lambie? Go right ahead.
Caller, please go ahead with your call.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening to everyone. You know, Doctor, especially Dr. Thompson Fontaine. You know, Mr. G, good program, good analysis, Mr. Fontaine. I'm 22 years to 23 years right now. It's a big, difference from this guy. You know, the other day I was reading the book George Orwell, Animal House, Animal Farm, and Dominica has turned into an animal farm, where the cunning and the most intelligent that's plotted and they put it against the people, and they greed take over, and they share it between themselves, and they subject the people to poverty, to shame, to mendicancy, to all ills, or to begging, to not working, to CEO, lavish lifestyle, and these guys wicked and evil. This guy is a heartless guy. Prime Minister Skerrit has no love for himself and for nobody. Don't make him fool you. Skerrit love Skerrit only. Skerrit came to politics. He want one agenda to enrich himself and to bring to Dominica on his knees. I don't know who did him wrong when he was small, but he has a plan for Dominica, and we have to rise against this guy and put all these guys by any means necessary. Thank you very much. Good night. Bless up.
And thank you very much for that. Gable, let me just go over to you, because we have to stop anytime because we're giving Lambie priority tonight. Lambie is running things on the console. So let me go over to you, Gable.
Thank you very much, Brother G. And let me just say this. Thompson has written, so he's added to the circumference of our knowledge. Brother Irving and a certain gentleman whose name I will not repeat have dedicated themselves to collecting all that which is necessary and reasonable, or reasonable and necessary, to put our history out there. Because you see, it's easy, there used to be a time where it would be easy to just complain and to be critical. Okay, so we talk about agriculture, we try to do the agriculture. We talk about the history, we do the history. We talk about the science and technology, we do the science and technology. And the fact of the matter is, when we broke with these guys, is when we're trying to build an indigenous power company. We brought the first wind turbines to Dominica. Isn't that correct, Dr. Fontaine? He's shaking his head, but he's mute. So the reality of it is a couple of things I want to really make sure is understood. So the Netherlands, therefore, has shown the way. We have shown the way before, and we can show the way again. And one of the reasons why we want to focus on the attributes of this government as compared to others is to look at what the attributes of good government, good governance really constitute. They're really about 5, okay? Number 1, if you're talking about, let's say, I always like to talk about the Procurement Act and why they consistently violate it. What a Procurement Act does, and the issue of public tender does, is it says fair competition. You must have fair competition. It says the whole process must be transparent. It says that there are cost savings to be had because you're not relying on one person, as in the comment that Brother Irwin made about the bridge that was charged 18 million when it was really 12 million. So you have a padding of almost $6 million. Quality and expertise is solicited across the board. You have legal and ethical compliance. Can we say that in the building of the apartments that are falling apart? Can we say that about the airport? And then you have risk mitigation. What is that risk mitigation? Well, if all your eggs are in one basket and that basket falls, all the eggs get broken. So you give all the contracts to MNC and the houses are falling apart. What recourse do we have? And talk about lack of title. Irvin made a very, very good point. My wife and I were looking at a letter that was given to the folks at the apartments in La Plaine. And I stand to be corrected. Someone in the listening audience can call to correct yours truly, but the letter says, somewhere quoted the good book, it said at the penultimate paragraph, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. I kid you not. I saw that in a document given to one of the apartment occupants. And then Skerrit came back later on and said that these apartments belong to the government of Dominica. Now, if the apartments belong to the government of Dominica, is there a contract that has been signed by the occupants that openly acknowledges that I am renting this apartment, or better yet, I've been given this apartment by the government of Dominica until X date? Any serious sort of arrangement in any serious country, that must be a creature of statute. If you're in a rule of law regime and not a one-man band regime, when you do things like that, I gave Sheridan an apartment, I'm the government, I must have some sort of statutory basis in law that the legislature must have sat down and discussed and voted upon. And says, okay, We are going to have some people that will need apartments because their homes were blown down during the hurricane, and so we're going to give them some government housing. And this is the start. It's public law, 2023. A bill intended to provide for the housing of the needy in the Commonwealth of Dominica. And you have that bill, it's brought to Parliament, first reading, second reading, and then, the edits and so on, then you take a vote. Is that how things are done, Mr. G? In a parliamentary democracy, Mr. Fountain? Am I missing something?
No, I don't think you're missing anything.
And so you have one man saying, on one hand, oh, it belongs to them. On the other hand, it's government housing. And then a document that says, the Lord giveth. So when was the Lord in Parliament now? I mean, I know there are a lot of people in Parliament with fancy hats and wearing cape like Batman and Robin and Superman and so on. I mean, what kind of nonsense is this we're talking about now in Dominica? Where things are just being done anyhow, Vicky and so on. This does not work. Just like a famous would-be president who was president of nothing but himself said the ports would not work. The airport would not work. This kind of government does not work. It does not work for ordinary Dominicans. It makes no sense. It is ludicrous. It is, in fact, illegitimate. When you're in that sort of contorted regime where you have no statute underlying the policy that's obviously in place, you have no procurement law that's been abided by, you have no reading of bills to really transform those bills into law, you're really at sea without a rudder, without a canoe, and a crooked captain. And so this is the reality we're facing. And so we are saying that energy flows where the focus goes. If you focus on water resource management and stormwater management, then you won't see floods destroying villages and bridges, because you would have had a conference with engineers to do flood risk mitigation. If you know that your neighboring islands have lost their rivers because of deforestation, and you are lucky by God's grace to have forests and to have a water catchment or water catchments, plural, which allow you to have a water export capacity, then you would have met with civil engineers and foresters and people in the water science business to prepare for that. You wouldn't have taken your time to go into a studio to make a song about who is the world boss, you see. You'd have been doing things that are more meaningful, you see. Energy flows where the focus goes. So what you put your focus on is what really characterizes your output. So Thompson decides to go to school and study economics and so on, and he has a job working in economic development in South Sudan. Irvin Andre decided to go to school. He studied law and was an outstanding barrister, and then he was selected as a judge in Canada and is one of the most brilliant judges in Canada at this time. Energy flows where the focus goes. As for me, I just try to do my best to set the captives free. And the reality about it is, we have to understand where we see waywardness in Dominica, we see delinquency in government, we have to ask ourselves, what are they thinking? What are they doing? I think the absence of any progress speaks to that and provides an answer. Thank you.
Well, yes. And, Thompson and Irving, I mean, what Gabriel just introduced it. The question of the energy goes in where the focus goes. Obviously, at this time, the focus is on CO. The focus is not on these things like ensuring that you have bids and that you look at the laws for procurement and that you respect them, that you go to Parliament to get parliamentary approval for certain. I feel bad for the folks who are living in these apartments and just can't get a title. I'm not so sure if they ever will get a title for those properties. And I'm not even sure whether any effort has been made to go to Parliament to discuss this thing, to see whether there is a way for the Parliament to decide what should be done in those apartments. All we hear is that these apartments belong. At one time, we were told, in fact, it was said very specifically that these people were going to own apartments. And then the next thing we know that is that the apartment belonged to the Dominican government. No, I'm absolutely not sure, Dr. Andre, what is going on. I mean, in terms of law and the whole question of lawlessness, what is going on? Because we've seen several things happening, a whole number of things happening that do not seem to be supported by law. I mean, when we look at the whole question of the electoral reform process, the process of consultation, I didn't see anything that looked very lawful and very transparent. There was not even any attempt to make it look like it was transparent. So, in any way, it looked obviously like it was one-sided. And why is it that everything has to be just outside of the law? I mean, yourself, Conry or Thompson, which any one of you might want to tackle that.
Sorry,
Well,
what's
Dr.
what?
Is the lawyer, so I was letting him do it.
Yes. Okay.
So your question is, why is everything must be done through the law? Is that what you're asking?
Sheridan, you're muted.
Asking, why is it that we have so much lawlessness? So why is it that we don't just abide by the law and do things in accordance with the law?
Well, the answer, my friend, is quite simple and it's quite straightforward and so on. To the extent that there is no focus or emphasis on compliance with the law, then the question is, how do you seriously expect people to obey the law? If hypothetically there is a pervading belief that your ability or the chances of you being prosecuted for anything wrong is tied or inextricably to the extent to which you are perceived to be a supporter of the directorate, then obviously there will be a proliferation of criminal activity. It stands to reason. And again, it's as simple as that. There is no incentive. There is no incentive whatsoever. If persons who are aggrieved, who have been identified, who have been targeted, perhaps because of their political affiliation, and that happens with the realization that nothing is going to come out of it, and why do you expect, seriously speaking, to have any type of regard for law or compliance with the law? I mean, look at the well-documented cases of victimization. I mean, what charges were ever laid with respect to the late Glenn Emanuel as a magistrate, What charges were ever laid? What charges were ever laid against those who brutalized persons in public while exercising peacefully their rights to protest or to associate or expression? Whatever happened to those who were brutalized in that fashion? Nothing came out of it. And once you have that insidious linkage between criminality and political affiliation, then you've lost it. Because there's no incentive to enforce the law. If your failure to enforce the law is a factor that will result in a promotion, then what is the incentive on enforcing anything? On the contrary, if you are perceived to be doing your duty to enforcing the law, you'll be victimized. What did somebody called Inspector Weeks said years ago in a church? They are the ones who are validated, recognized. Those who run roughshod over the rights of others, while the God-fearing, decent, honest, hard-working police officers, they are relegated to the sidelines. So what do you expect? There's no magic, there's no mystery about this phenomenon in Dominica. And obviously, the nation will never prosper with that type of pervasive attitude, which is like a cancer eating at the body politic of the nation. And if in fact certain persons in authority or religious authority, they add fuel to the fire and they validate and they vindicate and they normalize what's happening in Dominica despite the overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing, what do you expect? What do you expect? Because wrong becomes right and right becomes wrong. That is the sad, unfortunate state of affairs that in many respects we have to contend with. And that is why people stay silent, for fear of being identified as someone who doesn't endorse that perversion of our values in Dominica. But there is hope.
I think there is hope. When I listen to the message from Monsignor John Lewis, I believe there is hope. I'm inspired. I was inspired by that message, and I think there's hope. Thompson, we're coming down to the wire, but I want to give you a chance to address a couple of things and to maybe make your closing remarks as you liked. But here it is. I want to extend this whole question of the law. For example, the unlawfully holding CBI revenues in foreign accounts and not in the treasury. I mean, the Europeans have to tell us that. For us to know that that is where we're supposed to be. Lennox Linton has been saying that for the longest while. This money is supposed to be going into the treasury. When the question came up in Parliament, some answer was given, and up to now, no further explanation has been given. An explanation was promised from the AFS, but nothing has been forthcoming. So why is it that this continued breaching of the law? I mean, even in fact, who is trying to fool when we say to the Europeans and the British and the Americans, the Canadians, oh, our due diligence is superb. We're doing the best due diligence. We are the best firms in the world doing due diligence. And yet they're finding so many of these people have gone through the cracks, and all kind of people have these passports. And so many people have our diplomatic passports. They're ending up in jail. If our why don't we just abide by the law? So let me just, you can maybe address that as you make your closing remarks as well, Thompson. I'll give you as much time as you need for that.
Oh, absolutely. Mr. G, indeed, you know, and I just want to assure the Dominican public that with regards to this monies outside of the accounts, that we are going to do something about it. We'll be telling the public a lot more, but we're in the process of taking some legal action that would force those monies back into the treasury. So we'll be giving a lot more information out to the public, but the United Workers' Party is taking the lead in tackling this issue, because we believe that this money needs to come back into the coffers of Dominica that rightfully belongs to Dominica, and we will do everything within the gambit of the law to ensure that this money is come back. And we have started that process. And as I said, in the next few days, we'll have a lot more information to give to the Dominican public about it. But at least we are doing something. You know, we're not just talking, but we want to do something. We want to really go aggressively after this, you know. And you also mentioned the issue of due diligence and how the whole program is in disarray and how poor innocent Dominicans are suffering. Imagine having to hustle for a visa to go to the United Kingdom and to Canada, and everything that involves the additional cost of travel and everything else that goes with having to get a visa. So we have lost our way so badly, you know. But Mr. J, it is one thing for, and Gabe and Dr. Henry, it is one thing for a government to err and a prime minister to lose his way. But it is quite another for an entire segment of the population to be supporting those things. And that is where I have problems with, you know. This person has gone astray, but what you have is the enablers. You have a group of, and a significant number of persons that are enabling that behavior. A significant amount of persons who will not speak truth to power, who will not tell him as it is, because they're probably benefiting some way out of all of those misdeeds. And that is where the problem is. And so my appeal really is to the people of Dominica and to the conscience of a collective nation, that we ultimately, it will be on us. Because at the end of the day, who is reaping the reward? Gabe talked about earlier about his teeth being set on edge, dying glassy. You know, the parents are the ones who eat the sour grapes, you know, but who bears the consequence of that? Are the children.
Well, you know what Chubby said, Mama mange voisin.
He said, that's a glassy. Yeah, it's the children. It's the children that is, and what we're seeing, Mr. G, is a manifestation on our young people. All of this enabling that we have done as parents, our young people are paying a serious price.
Terrible price in blood.
We had
a bloody price.
a bloody price. We just had in the past week, we had 3 attempted murders, a double murder of 2 young men, 2 young brothers in Roseau, one in Marigot, one in Wesley. That is 4 young persons with the intent to kill. That's in addition to the 17 or 18 murders we have already for the year. Our young people are paying a price that is just incredible. Our young people have gone astray. Dr. Dangleben gave the example of this young man, he met 2 young boys with SMA, going to SMA, and he asked them what they want to be when they grow up. Guys, we're not talking about being doctors or engineers or lawyers. They said they want to go and get that thing in Guadeloupe. That was their aspiration. These are high school kids.
The white lady.
Yes.
The white lady.
Because that is their future. Their future is to head in that direction. And I am stunned at how widespread it is. And the adults in our society are not realizing the pain and the suffering of the young people. We are losing a generation of young people. And all of that goes back to this government. When a prime minister can say no law, no constitution, and yet we, as the people, stand up and clap and applaud, we are reaping the whirlwind, and it is not a good thing. And my heart really breaks for the young people of Dominica in particular, because I remember as a young person, just the hope and and just this desire to live, to explore the world, the dreams we had as young people again, growing up in Dominica, because the environment encouraged us to dream and to dream big. We could be anything we wanted to be. Now we have our young people desiring to be drug dealers when they grow old. I mean, we have come a long way down, and we need to address this. We absolutely need to address this. But, we have, and I keep saying this, the obstacle to all of our progress is this governance issue. It is overriding. It is this disregard for laws. It is this punishing of the people to have them in apartments that do not belong to them, so that when they die, you can take away the keys even before the body gets cold. I mean, this is horrendous. This is unthinkable. This is terrible. And at the end of the day, we are not seeing the growth. We are not seeing the development. We are losing the jobs. We are losing our agriculture sector. We are being bypassed. Not even water that we have in every corner that we can convince our Caribbean brothers to get from us. We have lost the plot, Mr. G, in a big way. And the pain and the suffering and the price is what gets me. And we're seeing it in manifest every single day. The price that the young people in particular are paying for the misdeeds of this government. And the mansions continue to go up. The monies continue to be drained away. And we feel sometimes helpless, but we should not be helpless. I think as a people, we need to do more. We need to continue to demand electoral reform. And this government has to do the right thing. Do the electoral reform. Stop cheating on elections. And the people who support this effort, stop doing this. I mean, this whole issue could come to a halt tomorrow. If the people who have been bribed to pay to come to Dominic simply say, okay, we are not taking part in this. We will not be a part of the destruction of our country. That's all people have to say, When they are offered a free ticket and $500, say, I will not be a part in the destruction of my country. I want no part in this. That's what we need to do. That's the place we need to get, so that we do not enable. Because a lot of the energies, a lot of what we are seeing today is because we have people who are enabling those efforts of this errant government. And 45 years after independence, we've lost our way. We are going down a blind alley. We are losing our young people. We are losing our country. Our consciences have been darkened, and we are simply in the wrong place. 45 years after our independence, we need to reverse that trend. We need to go back. As Chubby would say, we need to bring back the milk and the honey that is truly ours in Dominica. Good night, Dominica.
Excellent, Thompson. But Gibbo, we know that history has shown clearly that the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And when we hear our government says to us, if not passports, then what? And then they turn around and they mess it up by not doing proper due diligence. And they turn around again and unlawfully keep the money outside. So if you have $8 billion outside, so the structures of the economy are not being impacted. So you're not going to get any major thing happening in agriculture or in industry or in manufacturing or in knowledge industries or in tourism or anything because the money's outside. How then does that impact the economy? How then does that impact the lives, the quality of life and the living standards of the young people, the country who are desperately looking for jobs and they cannot find it and they have to be all over the place migrating? As you give us your thoughts on that as you make your closing remarks, I'll give you a time to do that.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. G. And I just want to say that I endorse everything that my brother Irving said earlier and everything that my brother Thompson Fontaine just related with regard to the enablers. You see, not far from us is an island called Haiti. And for about 40 years, one man, Papa Doc, and his son, Baby Doc, with their mischievous wives, who saw nothing about social responsibility and voluntarism and helping the poor, but just bought all kinds of fancy clothing and lived in a white palace, a mansion, while Haitians were increasingly impoverished. They didn't do it on their own. Thompson is very correct. They had enablers. We have television. We see the videos of Adolf Hitler and the adoring crowds, just like Baby Doc and Papa Doc had the adoring crowds. They could do no wrong. And where's Haiti today? As for Germany, under Hitler, we know where that ended. In a bloody drama. And when they captured a lot of the Nazi enablers, the same kind of people, the same kind of mentality, as long as you're profiting, as long as you're benefiting, as long as you're getting fat, they were fine with the program. When they caught them, they said, oh, I didn't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't one of them. I was a cook. I was a medic. Like Rip Van Winkle. So many of them were asleep, supposedly. Let me just speak about one element of betrayal of our country. And let me give a solution that is based on our spirit of Kudme, because we have to talk to the issues. We have to outline the problem, but we also have to be majestic in spirit to identify cogent solutions. Ross University left Dominica. Remember I talked about energy flows where the focus goes? Look at what we had at the time Ross left for Barbados. And tell me whether we did not have a Portsmouth government. Let me give you the names. Dominicans, listen carefully. One, Roosevelt Skerritt, supposedly a Frenchman from Vicaz, but actually a Portsmouth man by any other measurement. Reginald Austrie, supposedly from Cottage, but really a Portsmouth man, PSS man by any yardstick. One, Ian Douglas, the nephew of Rosie Douglas, the son of Michael Douglas, clearly a Portsmouth man, member of parliament. One, Alec Lawrence, well-known attorney and CBI mastermind, Portsmouth man. Renworth Alexis, shopkeeper, hardware store owner, landlord, by any stretch of the imagination, a Portsmouth man. Lennox Lawrence, well-known CBI mastermind, another one, Portsmouth man. Levi Peter, the drumstick fella, Attorney General, Portsmouth man. He speak like he's from Westminster or Cambridge and so on, but he's a Portsmouth man. Titus Francis, top man in the hierarchy of the Labour Party, another Portsmouth man. And drum roll, please, ladies and gentlemen, the king on the hill in the 26 million state malice, as my good friend Jerry Brisbane called it, Charles Angelo Savre, the president of the land, by any stretch of the imagination, by any yardstick, a Portsmouth man. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 government grandees, all Portsmouth men. And not one of them had the intestinal fortitude, the foresight, the intelligence, another word they like to use nowadays in Dominica under the one-man band regime, the resilience. None of them were a world, quote-unquote, boss enough to stop the flight from Portsmouth, where it provided 40% of our GDP, to Barbados, where his friend, again, this thing friend has been abused, A friend, the way I understand it, is supposed to be someone who is close to you and has a degree of affinity for you. Someone who will not take the bread from your mouth, Papa God. Someone who will not take their hands and put their hand in your plate and take the meat. And then when they finish with the meat, take the dashing, the yampe, and the tululu. I mean, come on, my people. This is what a friend does. Is that what you call friend? I mean, if that's what you call friend, well, I mean, hell, we don't need any enemies. We don't need enemies. Not at all. Mere motley in a government made up of 10 Portsmouth men and a president, huffed Ross University and all the king's horses and all the $64,000 a month in rent, couldn't put Ross University back together again. My friend, where energy flows, where the focus goes. Where was their focus? Where was the focus of all these Portsmouth men? Bernard Sylvester's in there too. What were they thinking about? Obviously, it wasn't of Portsmouth. Obviously, it wasn't of Ross. Obviously, it wasn't Dominica's economy. Because if they were thinking about Ross University, they would do backflips, somersaults, bubba job, jumble sail, whatever has to be done, car wash and so on, to make sure the resources were there and the enabling environment was there to ensure that we retained in Dominica that which they met. So not only have they failed to provide industry, not only have they failed to provide agriculture, they have destroyed what they met. And that is the cardinal sin. And in this moment, I want to thank Monsignor Lewis for saving the church, because folks were basically giving up because the church had been usurped by Eustace Thomas and his ilk and the other Bido Leglise who pretend to be Christians and who are not. Thank you, sir. God bless you, sir. Long may you live, sir. Long may you live for giving us a sense of decency from the church. But the church had also in the past, although we know its history in colonialism and slavery, but it had evolved. There was once a Belgian nun. She came from the Catholic workers' movement. It was a social justice movement. She really was a socialist. Her name was Sister Alice de Tremery. And with Dominican masons and carpenters and electricians, they built the apartment buildings that are owned by Dominicans, built by Dominicans on the riverbank. Am I not correct? I'm Sheridan Gregoire.
100% correct.
Okay. But she did more than that. And this is where I'm coming with the solution. She also was a major player in what later came to be called the credit union movement with Elwin and the others. Mm-hmm. So that poor Black Dominicans and poor Kalinago Dominicans who could not face a bank developed their own financial instrumentality to gather their pennies. J.B. Charles had started with the penny bank, but that's what they built. So this is what I'm proposing. They say, man proposes, God disposes. I'm not pretending to be God, but this is what I'm saying we can do as Dominicans because of what we've done in the past. Dominicans, Mr. Gregoire is a fine businessman. Brother Irving is a fine jurist, author, historian, and family man. Brother Lambie has served us well at Master Control. And Brother Fountain is an economist. I'm proposing tonight on Q95, Global Voice and Q, that we in Dominica's diaspora, we do not want to send our money to give to Chinese anymore. No, we must stop it. If I send money, I must send it with the specific conditionality it be sent and spent in a business owned by a Dominican. Period. So we're saying this evening, with the help of Q95, we're going to launch this Shoppers Cooperative Movement to start in Dominica a shoppers cooperative movement. We will use internet protocol. We will link the monies we send to Dominican-owned businesses by internet protocol, and the money will go straight. You go to pick up your groceries. It has to be in a Dominican-owned store, a Dominican-owned farm. This is how we're going to spend our money. Let us put our monies where our mouths are and vice versa. Let's make sure we do not pay for our own enslavement, Dominican people. Let us make sure we spend our monies wisely by starting, with the help of Q95, a Dominican shoppers cooperative. We spend our money where people respect us.
Gabo, I think your mic got muted. You might want to unmute. Yeah.
We do not want it to be that we keep sending money, $50, $100, for folks to take that money and put it in someone else's hands to put chains on our country. We want to set up that shoppers cooperative. All Dominicans, therefore, can be members of it, and we'll partner with farmers. We'll partner with fisherfolk. We'll partner with Dominican-owned shopkeepers. We'll partner with Dominican tailors. We'll partner with Dominican entrepreneurs. That is how we regain our freedom, and that's how we break the back of the oligarchy that has been formed in partnership with foreign criminals to impoverish our people and to steal our independence. We can do it. Our people did it before. We can do it again. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Great, Gabo. Love to hear that. Always a good idea coming from you. Dr. Andre, both Dr. Thompson Fontaine, who's a great financial economist, and Gabriel Christian, who's a great attorney, they spoke about all these things, just leaving our shores, and all the things that were met there for the first 22 years of our self-governance. They seem to have been washed away under what came after in the next 23 years. Not only that, but we failed to even convince Antigua they should buy water from us instead of taking it from Trinidad. We failed to do due diligence, and when we had said, if not passports, that what? Now the Europeans, everybody going to put visa restrictions on us, and people wouldn't want to buy those parts. So again, they'll be meaningless. So, but part of the problem is, and when Gable spoke about our friends taking bread from our mouth, I mean, if these friends pushing their hand in your eye, you can't focus, I think that's what is happening. These friends are just pushing their hand in people's eyes, and they can't see. And so they're just giving away the shop. So, Dr. Andre, I mean, give us your closing remarks. Well, anything you want to say, and then your closing remarks.
Yeah, well, look, we are at this juncture of our history where we have to put up or shut up. The whole example of the water is a terrible indictment of where we are. Now, look at Dominica from a geographic perspective, and look at Antigua. Dominica is right next door to Antigua. In fact, a little over a year ago, there was an infamous case involving the kidnapping of this Indian resident or citizen or national called Choksi. They were able to transport him to Dominica in a few hours. And if the Antiguan government is bypassing Dominica and going the way south in the Caribbean to Trinidad for water, of which Dominica has in abundance, we have so much that we waste it. We show little regard for it. We even destroy the catchment areas. But there's a biblical prophecy or message that, look, I mean, if you cannot appreciate the bounty that you have been given, then perhaps someone else should enjoy it for you. So this is a terrible indictment of where we are, that Antigua, our friend, what's his name again? The Prime Minister, who basically,
Mr. Gaston Brown,
who basically relied on Dominica to bail out Antigua in so far as Choksi is concerned. But when he needed something, he goes just Trinidad, as opposed to Dominica, which is right on his back door. The question is very simple. What does that tell you about how they regard Dominica? Look at the tendency of this government to pick up every snake oil salesman in the Eastern Caribbean, particularly Barbados. Link that to the recent incident or the recent situation where this fellow, this so-called pollster, who made it clear and who, in my view, played a role in the importation of voters to vote in Dominica, declared publicly recently that he would not recommend that Barbados go the same route. Mia Motley, isn't that the same? There was a Mia Motley once upon a time who wrote a report in terms of electoral reform, $50,000. But this is the same Mia Motley who's not only turning a blind eye to electoral irregularities in Dominica, but led a Caribbean body which sanctioned the importation, or should I say the invasion, of a security force which tear-gassed a whole village on the very eve of a general election. Dominica has become the dumping ground of everything which is either immoral or everything which would not be countenanced in any of the other islands. This wholesale importation of voters is not countenanced from Jamaica right down to Trinidad and Tobago, not even Antigua, where historically everything goes. That is where we are now. And we have to change that dynamic. We have to change it through people's actions. There is, in fact, evidence that people are taking a stand. I mean, look at, for example, you have the Wednesday walkers, you have Rosie's walkers, but someone expressed this evening that we are threatened by the balkanization of the opposition in Dominica. There are a number of disparate organizations and entities who certainly take action on their own. There are some meager attempts to forge a consensus across political lines, but that is still very much in its embryonic stage. We have to rise to the occasion where we have to join hands and hearts and say that is the only way we can change this sorry scheme of things entire in Dominica. It is within us to be able to do so. We have the fortitude to do so. We can be united by a common purpose, a common spirit, a common realization, a common desire to put Dominica on a new path. Because I can tell you one thing, the path on which it is now treading will lead to oblivion, will lead to disaster, will lead to economic ruin. And those most affected, or should I say afflicted by measures taken in Europe, North America, and England in terms of restriction on freedom of movement or migration or visitation to these countries, those who are most fully affected are Dominicans on the ground, Dominicans with limited means. And the political electorate doesn't care, because after all, when they have any type of malady, they fly out to get advanced medical care. And Dominica have to contend with a hospital where you have to bring your own bandage and your own paracetamol and your own bed linen and your own back and neck. The question is, why should we be satisfied with that sorry state of things? Don't you deserve better? Are you the pariahs of the Caribbean? Is it that you are the poor second cousin? What are we? Should we not take our place at the table of equality within the Caribbean? Why should we be content in terms of regressing? When we know better, we have brains. Look at your panel, look at Gibu, look at Thompson, look at yourself, look at Lambi, Lazarus personified. We should seize the moment, and we should seize those God-given gifts and talents and fortitude that has been given to us. Whether we seek inspiration from religion, whether we seek inspiration from history, we should be united by this realization that salvation lies within us, not outside. Not just in the good book, because the good book tells you God only helps those who help themselves. We have to come to that realization. Unfortunately, there's evidence that many more of us are coming to that realization, because this path on which we are will lead to nowhere. Don't take it from me. Take it from the evidence you see around you. The fact of the matter is, many of us will not be able to just bounce in another country and open a business or take up land that doesn't belong to us or displace a whole village. We would never have that luxury. But why should others have that luxury in Dominica? So, countrymen, Romans, listen. Don't listen to me. Listen to the voices you hear within yourselves and ask yourselves one question. Am I going to follow the dictates of my conscience? Am I going to follow all those voices, those historical voices? Whether it's LeBlanc, whether it's PJ, whether it's Patrick John or Edison James, Pierre Charles, Eugenia Charles. Am I going to listen to those voices and help to bring salvation to my own country? And there's no doubt that if you listen to those voices, the future is there for all of us to see. I thank you.
And thank you so much, Dr. Andre. But, as we wrap here, when I listen to the words that you just used a while ago, and what Gable said and what Thompson said, what comes to mind is a good friend of mine. He likes to say this, Nupa Muntu. You might know him, Dr. Andre.
I think I know him. We are two sisters' children.
Well, you're two sisters. Well, gentlemen, I thank you so much. And I want to thank all the folks on Facebook who's been with us throughout, and all the folks who've been with us in Radio Land, in Dominica, in the region, and globally, and all of you who are with us on YouTube. And thank you, Thompson, and thank you, Irving. Thank you, Gable. I mean, it was really good for us to have this conversation tonight. I don't think we've exhausted all of the information we have brought out about all these leaders and all those eras. Maybe sometime we'll get to do something more on it. But at this time, when we're supposed to be celebrating some kind of independence, I think it was appropriate for us to examine those leaders and their eras and what they've achieved. Certainly, many of them have achieved a lot more than we're achieving now. And in fact, I have to make a comment on this, Irving, because you mentioned about the World Creole Music Festival. And because I was a part of it, I feel really a sense of obligation to think that we need to do something more than what we're doing. This is not where it was intended to go. This is not where it was intended to be at this stage. It should have been a lot more advanced. It's unfortunate that it is where it is. Some people would like to make claim as if, well, they're the ones who started it, or they're the ones who did this or did that. I mean, what does it really matter? I mean, you're muted, Irving.
I apologize for interjecting, but there is something I must mention. This year, and I have credible information, 13,000 tickets were given to supporters. Last year, $9,000. And I ask any psychophant to refute what I'm saying. That is what the World Creole Festival has been reduced to. Another poke from the political directorate. A cancer which is stifling everything in Dominica.
Gable, is there something that you wanted to say on that?
No, I listened to Brother Irving and Andrew and Thompson, and we just have to move now to being able to spend our monies with our own, for us, by us. You see, because at the end of the day, the United States, England, Canada, none of these countries are going to save us. We're going to have to save ourselves. God has given us the wisdom, and we have the ability. We've shown it before. Look, we have much more than the folks who came out of the slave abolition or emancipation in 1834. We have much more. We have much more in way of education. We have much more in way of networks. And so, like the folks who were chased out of Egypt had to find their way. Let's find our way. And when we send monies home, let's do it in a way that is meaningful. Let us really reflect on every single purchase we make, and let us have a network. We have IT now. There's all things like Cash App and all that stuff. We can use technology to free ourselves and to do it in a way that we can begin to build the connective tissue of cooperative effort now. So when the change that we are fighting to effect takes place, we have now been seasoned already in working together. So it will be a seamless transition. You see, because oftentimes folks realize you can't take a pill and just lose all the weight and get all the strength. You have to exercise. It's painful. It takes a little effort, but we have to do it. And I'm just really gratified that this evening we were inspired this evening to begin to put together the scaffolding of our success. You see, and we have had 20 plus years of the. I don't want to say Portsmouth government, but the people who could have done something because they had the power to do it. You see, they had everything at their disposal and they failed abysmally. And so it's up to us now, with our grace and kindness and love one towards another, and loving our country as we do, to hold hands, even with those persons who call themselves labor, let them come home, like little Bo Peep with the tails wagging behind them. Let's come in the house. We're not going to push anybody out because we don't believe in exclusivity. We believe in inclusivity. We believe in Dominicans coming together. I think that's what Monsignor Lewis was saying to us. Let's come together. Let's hold hands. Let's be honest with each other. And let's do the right thing by our country. And that's what we want to do. And God bless Q95. God bless all of you here this evening. It's been a high honor and privilege to be with you, gentlemen.
Yes, and thanks a lot, Gable. And I just want to say, I think I concur with all three of you because I heard, Gable, you said it. Irving said it. And also Thompson said it. All to do with this international network for financing the interests of the people. And I think it's a good idea to start thinking about that, especially from a point of view of the diaspora. So I think this is something that is doable, that some thought should be given to it. So gentlemen, thank you very much for coming here tonight. Dr. Andre Thompson.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, listeners. Thank Lambi.
Thank you,
Lambi.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent, Thompson. Have a good night.
Night, night.
Take care. Wonderful. Good evening.
Bye.
Out my window and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by wars and eaten up by starvation. I'm saying when this ugly will be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people